All right, get ready for a deep dive. We're going to explore fibroblast growth factor receptors, also known as FGFRs. We'll be looking at their roles in development and tissue repair, and we'll even touch on their potential in therapy.
These receptors are amazing. They act like conductors in a cellular orchestra, directing a ton of signals that shape us and how we function.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful image.
Yeah.
So to really understand these FGFRs, where do we start?
Let's start by thinking of FGFRs as these transmembrane proteins. They act like bridges across the cell membrane. They're a communication link between the outside world and what's happening inside the cell.
I'm picturing a bridge. So what exactly is going across this bridge? What messages are they carrying?
On one side of the bridge, you have these signaling molecules. They're called fibroblast growth factors, or FGFs. They carry essential instructions.
So the FGFRs escort the FGFs across the bridge.
Exactly. And when the FGFs bind to the FGFRs, it sets off a cascade of events inside the cell. It's like dominoes. One signal leads to another. This ultimately causes the cell to grow, change, or even repair itself.
That's amazing. So there's not just one type of FGFR, right? It's like a family.
You got it. And it gets even more interesting. These FGFRs are diversified through something called alternative splicing. Think of it like editing a film. Different versions or isoforms of the receptor can be created, and they each have unique properties.
Ah, so it's like different versions of the same movie. Each one's a bit different. So these variations change how the FGFRs function.
Absolutely. Splicing can change how attracted an FGFR is to certain FGFs. It can even change the signals triggered inside the cell.
So splicing adds another layer of complexity to the FGFRs. But with so much complexity, can things go wrong?
You're right. When FGFR signaling malfunctions, it can lead to a bunch of issues. Imagine the orchestra playing out of tune. Signals get mixed up. This can cause developmental disorders, problems with tissue repair, and even contribute to diseases like cancer.
That's kind of scary. So understanding FGFRs isn't just about their power, but also about how things can go wrong.
Precisely. And this knowledge can be valuable. Researchers are exploring ways to use FGFR signaling for therapy.
Okay, now that's really interesting. Can you give us a peek at what scientists are working on?
One thing they're doing is developing drugs. These drugs target specific FGFRs. They can block their activity or make it stronger. Depends on the situation. It's like fine-tuning the orchestra.
So they turn it up or down depending on what they needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty incredible. Are there any examples of specific diseases where this is being explored?
Absolutely. Scientists are looking into FGFR targeting therapies. They could be helpful for conditions like cancer, skeletal disorders, and even wound healing. There's a lot of potential there.
It sounds like something out of science fiction. Repairing tissues, regrowing bones, all by manipulating these little receptors.
I know, right? It just shows how powerful it is to understand these cellular processes. And speaking of repair, FGFRs are also crucial for regeneration.
Wait, regeneration, like regrowing limbs? Now we're talking superheroes.
Not quite superheroes yet, but it's definitely amazing. Remember how we talked about FGFRs being involved in tissue repair? Well, for some organisms, this goes beyond patching things up. They can actually regrow lost body parts.
That's blowing my mind. I've heard of salamanders regrowing limbs, but I had no idea FGFRs were involved.
They are. They play a key role in organizing the cellular events. These events are what make this amazing regeneration possible.
So can you walk me through how this regeneration works?
Imagine you're a salamander and you lose a limb. At the spot where the injury is, cells gather and form something called a blastema.
Blastema, got it. So what's so special about these cells?
These blastema cells are kind of like stem cells. They can become any type of cell needed to rebuild the limb. Bone, muscle, nerve, you name it. And guess what directs all of this? You guessed it. FGFRs.
So the FGFRs guide these blastema cells to become everything needed to grow a new limb.
Exactly. It's this fascinating interaction of signals and responses. That's how a perfect new limb forms.
Wow, that's incredible. That makes me wonder if humans will ever be able to do that.
That's the question, isn't it? While humans don't regenerate like salamanders, we can regenerate a little. Think about wounds healing or how your liver can regenerate after an injury.
Okay, so there's hope. Maybe we'll be able to tap into that ability someday.
There's always hope. And by looking at how other species regenerate, scientists hope to figure out the secrets. And maybe one day, we can boost our own regenerative abilities.
I can't wait to see what happens with this research. But for now, let's talk about something that highlights how complex and specific these pathways are. Have you heard about how cardiomyocytes respond differently to signals, even when those signals activate the same pathway? Cardiomyocytes are the cells that make up your heart muscle.
Ah, yes. It's like sending the same email to two different departments. You'll get two totally different responses.
Okay, tell me more. I'm interested.
Cardiomyocytes have receptors called beta-1 adrenergic receptors. When these are stimulated by adrenaline, your heart rate and contractions increase. It's the fight or flight response.
Makes sense. Adrenaline gets your heart going.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Cardiomyocytes also have another type of receptor called EP4 receptors. These bind to a signaling molecule called prostaglandin E2.
Okay, so two different receptors and signals. What happens when they're activated? Do they both trigger that fight or flight response?
That's what's so interesting. Both beta-1 adrenergic receptors and EP4 receptors actually activate the same pathway. It eventually leads to the production of a molecule called cyclic AMP.
Wait, they activate the same pathway, but you said they cause different things to happen?
You're right, that's the interesting part. You'd think activating the same pathway would lead to the same outcome. But stimulating beta-1 adrenergic receptors causes increased contractility. You get that fight or flight response. But stimulating EP4 receptors doesn't cause that.
So how do we explain that? It's like the same key unlocking two different doors.
That's a great way to put it. And the answer is something called cyclic AMP signaling microdomains. You can also call them compartments. Even though both receptors activate the same pathway, they don't do it in the same spot within the cell.
Microdomains, compartments. So it's like different areas in the cell. Each one has its own job.
Exactly. Think about it like different rooms in a house. Even though the same signal is sent, it goes to different rooms. And that leads to different results.
This is wild. So how are these compartments made and kept separate? What keeps the cell organized?
That's where a kinase anchoring proteins, or AKPs, come in.
AKKPs. Tell me more about these organizers.
AKPs are like the architects of these microdomains. They create special workspaces in the cell. That way, certain reactions can happen without being interrupted.
So they organize everything and keep it running smoothly.
Exactly. One of their important roles is to anchor an enzyme called protein kinase A, or pKa, to certain places in the cell.
pKa sounds familiar. Didn't we talk about that with the cyclic AMP pathway?
You have a good memory. Yes, pKa is a key player in that pathway. By putting pKa in specific locations, AKAPs ensure it's in the right place at the right time.
It's all about location. So how do AKPs anchor pKa? What's their secret?
Their secret is a special structure called an amphipathic helix. This helix is part of the AKAT, and it acts like molecular Velcro. It lets it stick to pKa in a specific way.
Amphipathic helix. I think we talked about that with the beta-1 adrenergic receptors, right?
You're right. It's a common theme in protein interactions. These helices are how nature creates precise connections between molecules.
So it's all about getting the right players together in the right spot at the right time. These AKPs sound like amazing organizers.
They really are. They're essential for making sure cells respond to signals correctly.
I'm starting to understand how important AKPs are. But what happens when they don't work right? Does it mess everything up?
That's a great question. You're right. If AKPs aren't doing their job, signals might get misrouted, amplified, or even silenced. This can lead to a lot of problems.
Wow, this sounds like a big problem.
It can be. Scientists are studying the roles of AKPs in different diseases. They want to find new ways to treat them. Imagine being able to develop drugs that specifically target AKPs that could help restore normal signaling and treat a range of conditions.
That would be amazing. It's like being able to fine-tune the orchestra to make sure it's playing beautiful music.
I love that analogy. There are definitely challenges in developing these therapies, but the possibilities are huge. It really is amazing.
And since we're talking about cool receptors, let's go back to the thyroid hormone receptors. We talked about their role in development. But what about metamorphosis?
Metamorphosis, like when a caterpillar changes into a butterfly, I'm all ears.
Exactly. It's fascinating. And thyroid hormone receptors are essential. Let's consider frogs. They began as tadpoles. They breathe underwater with gills and swim with tails. But then they change dramatically and become adults. They breathe air with lungs and hop around on legs.
It's a total transformation. But where do the thyroid hormone receptors come in? Well, thyroid hormone controls amphibian metamorphosis, and it does this through, you guessed it, thyroid hormone receptors. These receptors are all over the tadpole's body, and when thyroid hormone activates them, they cause all these genetic and cellular changes. That's what drives the transformation.
So thyroid hormone is like the conductor of this metamorphosis orchestra, and the receptors are the musicians, each playing their part.
That's a great analogy. And what's even cooler is that different tissues react to thyroid hormone differently. This results in all the different adult features developing. For example, in the limbs, Thyroid hormone signaling helps legs grow and the tail to be reabsorbed. In the lungs, it makes air sacs develop so the frog can breathe air, and in the gut, it changes things so the frog can switch from eating plants to eating meat.
It's amazing how one hormone can orchestrate so many changes. It's like a puppet master controlling everything.
It really is. This process shows just how powerful thyroid hormone receptors are in controlling development and adaptation.
I'm loving this metamorphosis stuff. But what if something goes wrong with the thyroid hormone receptor signaling? What happens then during metamorphosis?
That's a great question. If thyroid hormone signaling gets messed up, it can cause lots of developmental problems. Things like delayed or incomplete metamorphosis, or even abnormal structures forming. Sometimes these disruptions can even be deadly.
Oh no, that's sad. So it's really important to have the right amount of thyroid hormone signaling for metamorphosis to work.
Exactly. As scientists keep studying metamorphosis, they hope to better understand how thyroid hormone receptors make this incredible transformation happen.
This has been so enlightening. I've learned a lot about FGFRs and thyroid hormone receptors and their roles in development, tissue repair, and metamorphosis. So what else can you tell me about these receptors? Are there other cool examples of what they do?
We've just scratched the surface. These receptors are involved in so many things. Did you know that thyroid hormone receptors are also crucial in regulating metabolism?
Metabolism, like how our bodies use energy. Tell me more.
That's it. Thyroid hormone is a key regulator of metabolism. It influences how our bodies use energy and maintain a stable temperature. And guess what? It does this through, thyroid hormone receptors.
So it's like thyroid hormone is our body's thermostat, and the receptors are the sensors, making sure everything is at the right temperature.
That's a great way to think about it. These receptors are found in various tissues all over the body. This includes the liver, muscles, and fat. When thyroid hormone activates them, they start a cascade of events that revs up metabolism. This increases energy use and heat production.
So thyroid hormone receptors are like the conductors of our metabolic orchestra, keeping everything running smoothly.
Exactly. And what's even more interesting is that things like diet, stress, and even the time of day can affect how active these receptors are.
So it's a system that's always adapting to what's going on inside and outside of us. But what happens when things get out of balance?
That's a good question. When thyroid hormone signaling is out of whack, it can cause a bunch of metabolic disorders. These include hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism.
Hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism. I've heard of those, but could you remind me what they are?
Sure, hypothyroidism is when the thyroid gland doesn't make enough thyroid hormone. This slows down metabolism, which can cause weight gain, fatigue, and other symptoms. Hyperthyroidism is the opposite. It's when the thyroid gland makes too much thyroid hormone, leading to a faster metabolism, weight loss, a rapid heartbeat, and other issues.
Wow, so having too little or too much thyroid hormone is a problem. It's all about finding the right balance.
You got it. And that's where thyroid hormone receptors are key. They help maintain a healthy metabolic balance by fine-tuning their activity.
This has been really fascinating. I've learned a lot about the role of thyroid hormone receptors in metabolism. What else can you tell me about them? Are there any other surprising things they do?
You're right, balance is super important. And speaking of surprising things, did you know that thyroid hormone receptors are also found in the heart?
The heart, really? I thought that was all about pumping blood. How are thyroid hormone receptors involved?
They play a big role in regulating heart rate and contractility. That means how strongly the heart muscle contracts.
Wow, I had no idea. So too much thyroid hormone could make your heart beat really fast, right? Like when I drink too much coffee.
Not exactly the same, but you're on the right track. In hyperthyroidism, when there's an excess of thyroid hormone, the heart can get overstimulated. This can lead to a rapid heartbeat, palpitations, and even problems with heart rhythm.
So thyroid hormone receptors are like tiny conductors, keeping the heart beating at the right pace.
That's a great way to think about it. They make sure the heart beats efficiently and effectively, delivering oxygen-rich blood throughout the body.
This is incredible. It's like we're uncovering all these hidden layers in the body. And with each layer, we find these receptors playing a vital role.
Exactly. And now let's dig into another fascinating aspect of thyroid hormone receptors, their role in gene regulation.
Gene regulation. Okay, now we're getting into the details of how these receptors actually work.
Think of a cell like a busy city. Different departments are in charge of different functions. The genes are like the blueprints that tell each department how to operate. Thyroid hormone receptors are like the city planners. They control which blueprints are used.
So they decide which genes are turned on and off.
Precisely. They bind to specific DNA sequences near target genes, and they can either activate or repress their expression.
I'm picturing them like tiny switches, flipping genes on and off as needed.
That's a great visualization. And what's amazing is that they don't work alone. They team up with a bunch of other proteins. These complexes then fine-tune gene expression.
It's a team effort. It's like a cellular construction crew with thyroid hormone receptors as the foreman, leading the building of proteins.
Exactly. This whole process of gene regulation allows thyroid hormone to have all these different effects throughout the body.
I'm beginning to understand how these receptors are like master regulators. They control everything from metabolism to heart rate to gene expression. It's amazing.
It truly is, and we're only just starting to understand how much they influence. Speaking of influence, there's another fascinating aspect of thyroid hormone receptors I want to talk about, how they interact with other nuclear receptors.
Other nuclear receptors. Okay, we're expanding our cellular network now. Tell me about these interactions.
Thyroid hormone receptors aren't loners. They interact with other members of the nuclear receptor superfamily. They form partnerships that can either boost or reduce their activity.
It's like a cellular dance, where the receptors pair up and switch partners, influencing each other's moves.
That's a great way to put it. And these partnerships can have a big impact on gene regulation. For example, thyroid hormone receptors can form heterodimers. That's a partnership with another receptor. These heterodimers can then bind to DNA and regulate the expression of target genes.
Heterodimers, okay. So two different receptors team up to control gene expression. Can you give me some examples of these partnerships and what they do?
Absolutely. A well-studied example is the interaction between thyroid hormone receptors and retinoid X receptors, or RXRs. These two can form heterodimers that bind to specific DNA sequences. These sequences are called thyroid hormone response elements, or TREs. By binding to TREs, they control the expression of genes involved in a variety of things like development, metabolism, and cell growth.
So they're like a gene regulation power couple, working together to make sure everything runs smoothly.
Precisely. And this partnership is just one example of the complex interactions between different nuclear receptors. It's a whole network of interactions, but it allows for really precise control of gene expression and all sorts of biological processes.
This deep dive into thyroid hormone receptors has been incredible. I've learned so much about their complex roles in gene regulation, metabolism, and development. What else can you tell me about the broader family of fibroblast growth factor receptors, or FGFRs? We talked about their role in tissue repair and regeneration, but what about their role in other processes like bone growth?
That's a great question. You're right. FGFRs are super important for bone growth and development. They're essential for making and maintaining our skeletons.
Wow, I had no idea. So FGFRs are like the builders of our bones, making sure they're strong and healthy.
That's a great way to think about it. They control a whole bunch of events that govern how bones form, grow, and repair themselves.
Okay, tell me more. How does this bone-building process work?
Imagine a construction site full of activity. That's what's happening in our bones all the time, but on a tiny scale. You have different types of cells working together. Osteoblasts, which make new bone, and osteoclasts, which break down old bone.
So it's like constantly remodeling a house, building up and breaking down.
Exactly, and guess who's running the show? You got it, FGFRs. They receive signals from different places, like hormones and growth factors. They then pass these signals to the bone cells, telling them when to build, break down, and maintain the bone.
So they're like the foreman, making sure the work gets done right and at the right time.
Exactly. One of the key signals they listen to is Fibroblast Growth Factor, or FGF, which is where they get their name from.
FGF, the VIP at the FGFR party.
Yeah.
So what does FGF do in this bone building process?
FGF is like the chief architect. It sets the plan for bone development. When it binds to FGFRs on bone cells, it starts a chain reaction that encourages bone formation and growth.
This is amazing. It's like a tiny city under construction, with FGFRs managing the whole project.
That's a perfect analogy. It really shows how important FGFRs are in keeping our bones healthy.
I can see why scientists are so interested in FGFRs. They control so many vital processes. But with so much power, there must be potential problems too, right? What happens when something goes wrong with FGFR signaling during bone development?
That's an important question. Problems with FGFR signaling can cause a bunch of skeletal disorders. We already talked about dwarfism and craniosynostosis. It's all about balance. Even small disruptions can have big consequences.
Yeah, it's like one small change, setting off a domino effect throughout the whole system.
Exactly. Understanding these mechanisms isn't just about recognizing problems, though. It also helps us think about potential solutions. And this brings us back to the potential for new
Oh,
therapies.
yes. I want to hear more about how scientists are using FGFRs to develop new treatments.
Imagine fixing bone fractures faster, or even regrowing lost bone tissue. That's the kind of potential we're talking about. Researchers are developing drugs that target FGFRs that could be used for a variety of skeletal disorders. This includes osteoporosis, bone cancers, and even genetic conditions that affect bone growth.
That's incredible. It's like something straight out of science fiction, repairing and regenerating bones with targeted therapies.
It does, doesn't it? But it's not science fiction, it's real. Of course, there are challenges, but the possibilities are truly exciting.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into FGFRs and bone development. Thanks for taking us on this journey. What else can you tell me about thyroid hormone receptors? We've talked about their role in metamorphosis and metabolism. Are there any other cool examples of what they do?
Definitely. Their influence goes way beyond what we've discussed. Did you know that thyroid hormone receptors are also important for hearing?
Hearing. That's surprising. I thought that was all about sound waves and eardrums. What do thyroid hormone receptors have to do with it?
It might sound weird, but they're actually crucial for developing and maintaining the cochlea. That's the spiral-shaped part of the inner ear that turns sound vibrations into electrical signals that the brain understands.
So they're involved in the very core of how we hear.
Exactly. During development, thyroid hormone signaling through these receptors is super important for the cochlea to form properly. This includes those tiny hair cells, which are the ones that detect sound vibrations.
So they're like the architects of our hearing system, making sure everything is built right.
Precisely. And their role doesn't stop at development. Thyroid hormone signaling is important for keeping the cochlea healthy throughout our lives.
It's amazing how they're involved in something as fundamental as hearing. What happens if their signaling goes wrong in the cochlea?
Well, if thyroid hormone signaling is disrupted during cochlear development, it can cause hearing loss. That could be partial or complete hearing loss. Even later in life, thyroid hormone imbalances can affect how well we hear.
So they're like the protectors of our hearing, making sure we can hear the world around us.
Exactly. And this is just one example of the many surprising places where thyroid hormone receptors are at work. They really are amazing, playing important roles in lots of different biological processes.
This deep dive has been truly enlightening. I'm so glad we went on this journey together. What else can you tell me about these fascinating FGFRs? We've talked about their role in bone development and tissue repair. What about their role in other organs, like the liver?
Ah, great question.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about the interesting role FGFRs play in the liver. The liver is complex and has many functions, and FGFRs are involved in several key processes. This includes liver development, regeneration, and even metabolism.
Wow, I didn't know that. So FGFRs are like the multitasking managers of the liver, making sure everything is working as it should.
Exactly. They play a crucial role in orchestrating the liver's growth and development during the embryonic stage, ensuring it grows to the right size and has the right structure.
So they're like the architects of the liver, making sure the blueprints are followed correctly.
Precisely. And their role doesn't stop after development. Remember how we talked about FGFRs being involved in tissue repair and regeneration? Well, the liver is incredible at regenerating after an injury. And guess who plays a big role in this? You guessed it, FGFRs.
They're like the first responders, rushing in to fix the damage and get the liver back to normal.
That's a great way to think about it. They help stimulate the growth of new liver cells and blood vessels, which are crucial for restoring liver function after an injury.
It's amazing how these receptors are involved in both building and repairing the liver. What happens if their signaling gets messed up in the liver?
Disruptions in FGFR signaling can cause all sorts of liver problems. This ranges from developmental abnormalities to problems with regeneration and even liver cancer. Maintaining the right level of FGFR signaling is crucial for a healthy liver.
So they're like the guardians of the liver, keeping it healthy and functioning properly.
Exactly. And this is just one example of the many fascinating roles that FGFRs play throughout the body. They are truly multifaceted and influence a wide range of biological processes.
This deep dive has been truly enlightening. I'm so glad we went on this journey together. What else can you tell me about thyroid hormone receptors? We've discussed their roles in metamorphosis, metabolism, and hearing, but are there any other fascinating examples of their influence?
Absolutely. They're involved in many things we haven't even mentioned. For instance, did you know they play a role in regulating cholesterol levels?
Cholesterol levels, that's interesting. I thought cholesterol was mostly about diet and heart health. What do thyroid hormone receptors have to do with it?
It's all connected. Thyroid hormone helps regulate lipid metabolism, which includes how cholesterol is made and broken down, and guess how it does that? Yep, through thyroid hormone receptors.
They're like the traffic cops of cholesterol, directing its flow throughout the body.
That's a great analogy. These receptors are present in different tissues involved in cholesterol metabolism. This includes the liver, which is the main regulator of cholesterol levels. When thyroid hormone activates them, they can affect the expression of genes involved in cholesterol synthesis, uptake, and breakdown.
Okay, so they're like the managers of cholesterol production, making sure the factory is running at the right speed.
Exactly. And a healthy balance of thyroid hormone signaling is important for keeping cholesterol levels in check.
But what happens when this balance is disrupted?
Well, as you might imagine, imbalances in thyroid hormone signaling can lead to problems with cholesterol levels. For example, in hypothyroidism, when there's not enough thyroid hormone, cholesterol levels often go up. This increases the risk of heart disease.
So thyroid hormone receptors play a vital role in protecting our heart health. I'm curious, how do they actually regulate cholesterol at the molecular level?
That's a great question. It's a complicated process, but it shows the intricate relationship between the thyroid hormone receptors and gene regulation. Remember how we talked about these receptors binding to DNA and influencing gene expression?
Yes, I remember. They're like the conductors of the gene expression orchestra.
Exactly. Well, when it comes to cholesterol, thyroid hormone receptors can bind to specific DNA sequences near the genes involved in cholesterol metabolism. For example, they can activate the expression of genes that break down cholesterol or inhibit the expression of genes that make cholesterol.
They're like the fine-tuners of cholesterol production, adjusting different genes to maintain the right balance.
That's a great analogy. This intricate process highlights the power of thyroid hormone receptors in regulating lipid metabolism and ultimately our overall health.
This deep dive into thyroid hormone receptors has been truly fascinating. Thank you for taking us on this journey. What else can you tell me about these amazing FGFRs? We've talked about their roles in tissue repair, bone development, and liver function, but what about their involvement in the immune system?
Great question. You're right. We haven't even talked about the fascinating role FGFRs play in the immune system. It's this complex network of cells and molecules that defends our bodies against invaders. FGFRs are involved in several key processes, including immune cell development, activation, and regulation.
Wow, I had no idea. So FGFRs are like the strategists of the immune system, helping to coordinate our defenses.
That's a perfect way to put it. They play a key role in the development and maturation of different immune cells, including lymphocytes, which are the white blood cells that target and attack specific invaders.
So they're like the trainers getting the immune cells ready for battle.
Exactly. And that's not all. FGFRs are also involved in activating immune cells, triggering them to respond to threats. When the body detects an invader, some immune cells release signaling molecules, including, you guessed it, FGFs.
FGF, the signal flare that calls the immune troops into action.
Precisely. These FGFs bind to FGFRs on other immune cells, activating them and setting off a chain reaction that leads to the destruction of the invader.
It's incredible how these receptors are involved in both preparing and mobilizing the immune system. What happens when something goes wrong with FGFR signaling in the immune system?
Just as you might imagine, problems with FGFR signaling can cause a variety of immune system issues. This could range from immunodeficiency, which is a weakened immune response, to autoimmune disorders, where the immune system attacks the body's own tissues.
So they're like the peacekeepers of the immune system, ensuring it's balanced and functioning correctly.
Absolutely. Maintaining that delicate balance is essential for a healthy immune system.
This deep dive has been really enlightening. What else can you tell me about thyroid hormone receptors? We've discussed their roles in metamorphosis, metabolism, hearing, and cholesterol regulation. But what about other areas like regulating body temperature?
Definitely. Their influence extends to many areas we haven't even talked about. For example, do you know they play a role in regulating body temperature?
Body temperature. That's interesting. I always thought that was controlled mainly by the hypothalamus, which acts like our internal thermostat. What do thyroid hormone receptors have to do with it?
It's all connected. Thyroid hormone helps regulate metabolism, and as we've discussed, metabolism produces heat. So by influencing metabolism, thyroid hormone indirectly affects body temperature. And how does it do this? You guessed it, through thyroid hormone receptors.
So they're like the furnace regulators in our bodies, keeping us warm and cozy.
That's a great analogy. These receptors are found in various tissues involved in metabolism, including skeletal muscle, which produces a lot of heat. When they're activated by thyroid hormone, they can ramp up metabolism in these tissues, leading to increased heat production.
Okay, so they're like the thermostats in our muscle cells, turning up the heat when needed.
Exactly. This is one way our bodies maintain a stable internal temperature, even when it's cold outside.
But what happens when this balance gets thrown off?
Well, imbalances in thyroid hormone signaling can affect how our bodies regulate temperature. For instance, people with hypothyroidism, which means they don't have enough thyroid hormone, often feel cold and have trouble staying warm. On the other hand, people with hyperthyroidism who have too much thyroid hormone often feel hot and sweat a lot.
Wow, so those thyroid hormone receptors are crucial for keeping our internal temperature just right. But how do they sense temperature changes and adjust their activity?
That's a great question. It's a complex process involving thyroid hormone receptors, the hypothalamus, and other signaling pathways that regulate temperature.
Okay, tell me more about this temperature sensing system.
Think of the hypothalamus as the control center for temperature regulation. It's constantly checking our internal temperature and sending out signals to adjust it as needed. When our body temperature drops, the hypothalamus releases a hormone called thyrotropin-releasing hormone, or TRH.
TRH, got it. What does it do?
TRH travels to the pituitary gland in the brain and tells it to release thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH.
TSH, okay, and what does that do?
TSH then travels to the thyroid gland and tells it to make and release more thyroid hormone. This thyroid hormone then goes throughout the body, binding to thyroid hormone receptors in various tissues, including those involved in metabolism.
So it's like a chain reaction, a cascade of hormonal signals that ultimately increases heat production.
Exactly. And when our body temperature goes above the set point, the hypothalamus tells the body to release less TRH, which leads to less TSH and ultimately less thyroid hormone production. This feedback loop helps keep our body temperature within a tight range.
It's like a thermostat with multiple sensors and feedback mechanisms, constantly working to maintain a comfortable temperature.
That's a perfect analogy. Thyroid hormone receptors are essential in this system, ensuring that our bodies respond appropriately to temperature changes.
This deep dive has been truly enlightening. I'm curious to hear more about these fascinating FGFRs. We've talked about their role in tissue repair, bone development, liver function, and the immune system. But what about their involvement in other sensory systems, like vision?
Ah, you're right. FGFRs also play a crucial role in the development and function of our eyes. They're essential for the eye to form correctly and for the development of the retina, which is the light-sensitive tissue at the back of the eye that captures images.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So FGFRs are like the architects of our eyes, making sure we can see the world.
That's a great analogy. They control a complex series of events that govern the growth and differentiation of all the different cell types in the eye. This includes the photoreceptor cells, the rods and cones that detect light and send signals to the brain.
So they're like the conductors of the visual orchestra, making sure all the musicians are playing in tune.
Exactly. And one of the key signals they respond to during eye development is, as you might have guessed, FGF.
FGF, the maestro of eye development.
Hmm.
So what does FGF do in this process?
FGF acts as a guiding signal, providing instructions for cells to multiply, differentiate, and move to their correct spots in the developing eye. For example, it helps stimulate the growth of the optic cup, which will eventually become the retina, and it guides the formation of the lens.
It's amazing how one signaling molecule can do so many things. What happens when things go wrong with FGFR signaling during eye development?
As you might imagine, disruptions in FGFR signaling can lead to various eye defects. These can range from anophthalmia, which is the absence of one or both eyes, to microphthalmia, which means abnormally small eyes, to coloboma, a gap or hole in one of the eye's structures, like the iris, retina, or optic nerve.
Wow, these receptors are really important for making sure our eyes develop properly and function correctly.
Exactly. This process highlights the crucial role of FGFRs in shaping how we perceive the world around us.
This deep dive has been really enlightening. What else can you tell me about thyroid hormone receptors? We've talked about their roles in metamorphosis, metabolism, hearing, and cholesterol regulation, but what about their involvement in other developmental processes, like the formation of our lungs?
Absolutely. Their influence goes beyond what we've talked about. Did you know they're also involved in the development of the lungs?
The lungs. That's interesting. I thought lung development was mainly driven by breathing, the expansion and contraction of the chest cavity. What do thyroid hormone receptors have to do with it?
While breathing is definitely important for the lungs to function, Thyroid hormone plays a key role in their development and maturation. It ensures that the lungs are formed properly and can support respiration. And how does it do this? You guessed it, through thyroid hormone receptors.
So they're like the construction supervisors of our lungs, making sure they're built to breathe.
That's a great analogy. These receptors are found in various cell types in the developing lungs. When they're activated by thyroid hormone, they trigger a series of events that promote lung development.
Okay, tell me more about how this lung-building process works.
Imagine a tree branching out, its limbs growing and dividing, reaching up towards the sky. That's what happens inside the developing lungs. You have the trachea, or windpipe, branching into two bronchi, which then branch into smaller and smaller bronchioles, eventually leading to tiny air sacs called alveoli.
So it's like a tiny tree growing inside our chests, with each branch getting smaller until it reaches the tiny leaves, the alveoli.
Exactly. Thyroid hormone, working through its receptors, plays a crucial role in this branching process, stimulating the growth and differentiation of the cells that make up the airways.
Wow, so they're like gardeners, carefully shaping the branches of our lungs to create a functional and beautiful respiratory system.
That's a beautiful way to put it. This process shows the importance of thyroid hormone receptors in making sure our lungs develop correctly and can support breathing.
But what happens if something goes wrong with thyroid hormone receptor signaling during lung development?
If thyroid hormone signaling is disrupted, it can cause a variety of lung problems. These range from underdeveloped lungs, which can lead to breathing difficulties in newborns, to problems with lung function later in life.
So these receptors are like the protectors of our respiratory system, ensuring our lungs are strong and healthy.
Absolutely. Maintaining this delicate balance is crucial for a healthy respiratory system.
This deep dive has been amazing. I'm so glad we did this. I'm curious, what else can you tell me about FGFRs? We've covered their role in tissue repair, bone development, liver function, the immune system, and even vision. But what about their role in other parts of development, like how our limbs form?
Great question. You're right, we haven't talked about that yet. FGFRs are super important for limb development. They're essential for our arms and legs to form correctly.
Wow, I had no idea. So FGFRs are like the sculptors of our limbs, shaping them from little buds into working arms and legs.
That's a great analogy. They control this complex series of events that guide the growth, organization, and specialization of all the tissues that make up our limbs. That includes bones, muscles, tendons, and skin.
Okay, I'm hooked.
Ah.
Tell me more about this process. How do our limbs develop?
Picture a tiny bud of cells, like a seed that's about to sprout. That's how our limbs start in early development. These limb buds are groups of cells that haven't specialized yet. They have the potential to become any of the tissues in a limb.
So they're like stem cells waiting for instructions on what to turn into.
Exactly. And guess what gives them those instructions? Yep, FGFRs. They pick up signals from different sources, including signals that set up the body's layout, head to tail, front to back, and left to right. Then they relay those signals to the limb bud cells, telling them where to go, what to become, and when to stop growing.
They're like choreographers directing the movements and transformations of all those cells.
That's a great way to put it. And one of the key signals they respond to is, you guessed it, FGF.
FGF, the conductor of the limb development symphony. What's its role in all of this?
In this case, FGF acts like a growth and patterning factor. It gives instructions to the limb bud cells, telling them to multiply, specialize, and organize themselves into the different structures of a limb.
It's like watching a tiny ballet unfold, with FGFRs as the directors guiding all the movements and changes of the cells.
That's a beautiful way to think about it. This intricate process highlights just how important FGFRs are in shaping our bodies and allowing us to move around.
Well, what happens if something goes wrong with FGFR signaling during limb development?
Well, disruptions in FGFR signaling can cause all sorts of limb malformations. These can range from limbs that are too short or missing altogether, to extra fingers or toes, to bones that are fused together. It's all about balance. And even small problems can have big effects.
Wow, so these receptors are like the guardians of limb development, making sure everything happens as it should.
Exactly. This is just one example of the many roles FGFRs play in shaping our bodies and helping us interact with the world.
This has been such an amazing deep dive. What else can you tell me about thyroid hormone receptors? We've covered their roles in metamorphosis, metabolism, hearing, cholesterol regulation, body temperature, and lung development. Are there any other interesting examples of their influence?
Yeah, of course. Their influence extends to many areas we haven't even talked about. For instance, they play a role in the maturation of the intestines.
The intestines. That's interesting. I would have thought intestinal development was mostly driven by what we eat, like the food and bacteria that enter the digestive system. How are thyroid hormone receptors involved?
While diet is definitely important for shaping the gut microbiome and how the intestines work, thyroid hormone is crucial for their development and maturation. It ensures that they develop properly and can digest and absorb nutrients effectively. And you know how it does this. Through thyroid hormone receptors, of course.
So they're like the construction managers of our intestines, making sure they're built to handle digestion.
Exactly. These receptors are found in different cell types within the developing intestines. When activated by thyroid hormone, they trigger a whole series of events that promote intestinal development.
Okay, tell me more about how this happens. How do our intestines develop?
Imagine a long tube coiling and folding, with its inner lining developing complex structures that maximize its surface area. That's what's happening inside the developing intestines. You have the small intestine, which is responsible for absorbing most of the nutrients, and the large intestine, which absorbs water and gets rid of waste.
It sounds like a microscopic assembly line, with each section specialized for a particular job.
Precisely. And thyroid hormone, acting through its receptors, is essential for this development. It stimulates the growth and differentiation of the cells that line the intestines, helps form those finger-like projections that increase surface area, and influences the production of digestive enzymes.
They're like the interior designers of our intestines, creating a space that's both functional and efficient for digestion.
I love that analogy. This process highlights the crucial role of thyroid hormone receptors in ensuring that our intestines develop properly and can absorb nutrients effectively.
But what if something disrupts thyroid hormone receptor signaling during intestinal development?
As you might guess, disruptions in thyroid hormone signaling can cause all sorts of intestinal problems. This can range from malabsorption, which means difficulty absorbing nutrients, to issues with intestinal motility, which affects how food moves through the digestive system.
Wow, so these receptors are like the maintenance crew, making sure everything's running smoothly in our intestines.
That's a great way to put it. Maintaining this delicate balance is essential for a healthy digestive system.
This deep dive has been truly enlightening. I'm so glad we explored all of this together. What else can you tell me about FGFRs? We've talked about their role in tissue repair, bone development, liver function, the immune system, vision, and even limb development. What about their involvement in other developmental processes, like how our faces form?
You're right. We haven't touched on that yet. FGFRs play a crucial role in craniofacial development. That's the complex process that shapes our faces and skulls.
Craniofacial development sounds complicated. I always thought our faces were mostly determined by our genes, like a blueprint we inherit from our parents. How are FGFRs involved?
While genes do provide the basic instructions, FGFRs are essential for turning those instructions into the complex three-dimensional structures of our faces and skulls. They orchestrate a whole series of cellular events that control the growth, movement, and specialization of the different tissues that make up our craniofacial region. This includes bones, cartilage, muscles, and skin.
So they're like the conductors of the facial development orchestra, making sure all the different parts are playing together harmoniously.
Exactly. One of the key signals they respond to during this process is, as you might expect, FGF.
FGF, the maestro of facial development.
Mhm.
What does it do in this intricate process?
FGF acts as a guide, providing instructions for the cells involved in craniofacial development to multiply, specialize, and move to their correct locations. It's like giving the orchestra the sheet music and telling them when to play each note.
It's amazing to think of it like that, like watching a tiny sculpture being created, with FGFRs as the artists, shaping the contours of our faces and skulls.
That's a beautiful way to put it. This process highlights how crucial FGFRs are in creating our unique facial features.
What happens if FGFR signaling goes wrong during craniofacial development?
Well, problems with FGFR signaling can lead to a variety of craniofacial abnormalities. This can range from cleft lip and palate, which are openings or splits in the upper lip or the roof of the mouth, to craniosynostosis, where the skull bones fuse prematurely, causing an abnormal head shape, to facial asymmetry, where the two sides of the face are different sizes or shapes.
So they're like the guardians of facial harmony, ensuring that everything develops in a balanced and symmetrical way.
Exactly. This intricate process highlights how crucial FGFRs are in shaping not only our bodies, but also our identities.
This deep dive has been truly remarkable. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of the amazing roles that FGFRs and thyroid hormone receptors play in making us who we are, from our bones to our brains to our skin and hair. It's incredible how such tiny receptors can have such a huge impact on our lives.
I agree. It's humbling to consider the vast influence of these molecules. The more we learn about them, the more we appreciate the beauty and complexity of life.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember about FGFRs and thyroid hormone receptors?
I think the most important thing to remember is that these receptors are master regulators. They orchestrate so many cellular events that shape who we are, how we function, and how we interact with the world. Their influence is vast and touches almost every aspect of our biology.
It's like they're the invisible threads that weave together the tapestry of life.
That's a beautiful way to put it. As we continue to explore and understand these signaling pathways, we're sure to discover even more fascinating insights into the intricate dance of molecules that makes life possible.
Well said. This deep dive has been a true privilege. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and taking us on this journey through the microscopic world.
The pleasure was all mine. It's always a joy to talk about the excitement of scientific discovery.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to learn more about these amazing receptors. As you go about your day, remember the intricate dance of molecules happening inside every cell of your body, all orchestrated by these tiny but powerful players. And if you have any questions or want to explore further, we encourage you to look up research articles, explore online resources, or even connect with scientists who are working in this field. The journey of discovery never ends.
Absolutely. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep being amazed by the wonders of biology.
Until next time, happy deep diving.